Hey, what's going on, man? This is Johnny Cinco with another podcast. And again, this is The Professional, The Road to Mastery. And last time we left off on was chapter one, and also kind of give a little bit of my experience, life experience, and how I found that niche and went on that niche. But before we got there, I always want to talk about is just how did I find that niche, but also like who taught me, right? Who took that time to train me, and throughout life, we find ourselves always, kind of thinking about those type of things, like, who trained me, who did what for me, and reality is it's it's like the perfect storm, the perfect surroundings, and reality is like, I've been blessed, God, all thanks to God, for the people that surrounded me during those times, and where I was able to learn from people. So again, I always ask that get that book, The Mastery. I think it's very important to read. Um, there's a reason why there's literature. There's some good stuff and bad stuff out there, but it's always good to know. It's always good to know that there's something there that we can learn from people. So again, we're going to continue kind of going with this. And so let's see, let's start here. So again, I'm gonna read a little bit off this chapter two, and then just and follow along, and I'll add to it as we go through it. So again, right, chapter two of again the book of the mastery. I recommend all to get it because again, this is a great book. Submit to reality the ideal apprenticeship. After your formal education, you can enter the most critical phase in your life, a second practical education known as the apprenticeship. Every time you change career or acquire new skills, you re-enter this phase of life. The dangers are many. If you are not careful, you will succumb to insecurities, become embroidered in emotional issues and conflicts that will dominate your thoughts. You will feel develop you will develop fears and learn disabilities that you will carry with you throughout your life. Before it is too late, you must learn the lessons and follow the path established by the greatest masters, past and present, a kind of ideal apprenticeship that transcends all fields. In the process, you will master the necessary skills, discipline your mind, and transform yourself into a independent thinker. Prepare for the creative challenges on the way to mastery. So again, right, we're gonna get into mastery, and one of the things again I ask that you read the book is gonna go into Charles Darwin's kind of life experience, and through the book, when you kind of read this chapter in particularly, some of the paragraphs and some of his life experiences, you can kind of find where his family, his father in particularly did not think like didn't didn't believe his son, right, Charles Darwin, was going to be anything like almost like a runt of the family. His father was a professional, and he wanted his son to follow in that, and he had many opportunities to be a doctor, but he ended up kind of going on his own path, and eventually kind of going on a vessel on a voyage, headed to Brazil, and then he found himself challenging himself through the journey on the vessel, through his time in Brazil, collecting these different animals, different plants, and then stopping on islands and doing the same. But when he came back to Europe, he was a different man, right? He was an actual man, right? And I think that's kind of like what um, kind of went through, right? He kind of went through a change, the journey kind of changed him. And ultimately, coming back with that experience, that kind of ultimately made him a master, because again, the experience that he lived, he had that formal education before, but then also again, tidbits of formal education, but then eventually, kind of going out there and living that experience. and then coming back with just multiple locations, different animals, different plants, and fed into his mastery. So again, I asked you that you read it, but what I'm gonna get to is the keys to mastery. One can have no smaller or greater mastery than mastery of oneself, and that's Leonardo da Vinci. Again, in the stories of the greatest masters, past and present, we can inevitably detect a phase in their lives in which all of their future powers were in development, like the chrysalis of a butterfly. This part of their lives, a largely self-directed apprenticeship that lasts some 5 to 10 years, receives little attention because it does not contain stories of great achievement or discovery. Often in their apprenticeship phase, these are not yet much different from everyone else. Under the surface, however, their minds are transformed in a way we cannot see but contain all of the seeds of their future success. So again, right? It takes time, and that's the reality, right? All these different things take time to kind of master. And we got to understand that. We have to understand that it isn't going to come, fast. It's not going to come easy. It's going to be a challenge. So again, understand that is the case. But in studies that they did right, we can learn some invaluable lessons of ourselves. In fact, a close examination of their lives reveals a pattern that transcends their various fields, indicating a kind of ideal apprenticeship for mastery. And to grasp the pattern, to follow it in our own ways, we must understand something about the very idea and necessity for passing through an apprenticeship. And we're going to fast forward. If we adjust over time, we might eventually find our way. But if we make too many mistakes, we create endless problems for ourselves. We spend too much time entangled in emotional issues, and we never quite have enough detachment to reflect and learn from our experiences. The apprenticeship, by it by its very nature, must be conducted by each individual in his or her own way. To follow precisely the lead of others or advice from a book or is self-defeating. This is the phase in life in which we finally declare our independence and establish who we are. But for the second education in our lives, so critical to our future success, there are some powerful and essential lessons that we all can benefit from that can guide us away from common mistakes and save us valuable time. And I'm gonna fast forward. The principles is simple and must be engraved deeply in our minds. The goal of an apprenticeship is not money, a good position, a title, or a diploma, but rather the transformation of your mind and character. The first transformation on the way to mastery, you enter a career as a outsider. You are naive and full of misconceptions about this new world. Your head is full of dreams and fantasies about the future. Your knowledge of the world is subjective based on emotional insecurities and limited experience. Slowly, you will ground yourself in reality in the objective world represented by the knowledge and skill that make people successful in it. You learn how to work with others and handle criticism. In the process, you will transform yourself from someone who is impatient and scattered into someone who is disciplined and focused with a mind that can handle complexity. In the end, you will master yourself and all of your weaknesses. This has a simple consequence. You must choose places for work and positions that offer the greatest possibilities for learning. Now, fast forward. In the sense, you must see yourself as following in the footsteps of Charles Darwin. You are finally on your own on a voyage in which you will craft your own future. Fast forward. In fact, whenever you must learn a new skill or alter your career path later in life, you reconnect with your youthful adventure part of yourself. You must adopt such a spirit and see your apprenticeship as a kind of journey in which you will transform yourself rather than as a drab indoctrination into the work world. And again, right, it's a journey, and like any when I was growing up, I used to always like, well, I used to like always watching the boxing videos, UFC, and not so much. I mean, I did like watching the fights themselves, but something that I kind of enjoyed a lot was just seeing the the promotion, right? Seeing the journey, the 24/7s, HBO had 24/7 or All Access, and be able to see like these boxers, UFC fighters train, right, and see that somebody trained them, right? You see these people that are trained by a previous probably professional, previous boxer, previous wrestler, and they're the ones that learned this, the sport from them, so they understood like they're an apprentice to them. They're learning from somebody that they didn't, and they're humble enough to know, right, that they have the opportunities. One of those that you can probably see a lot is Manny Pacquiao, Julio Cesar Chavez, all those different, boxers that come from nothing that knew that boxing was their only outlet and they went all in. Um, but, as I kind of, look back in my life, there was many times in my life, during certain phases, I had an apprenticeship from somebody. Somebody took the time to train me, to teach me, to mentor me. May it be, somebody older than me or one of my peers. So again, you know, we're kind of going towards this apprenticeship and understanding that we got to learn, but it's going to be a journey. So the apprenticeship phase, the three steps or modes, with the principles outlined about guiding you in your choice, you must think of three essential steps in your apprenticeship, each one overlapping with and the other. Their steps are these steps are deep observation, the passive mode, skill acquisition, the practice mode, and experimentation, the active mode. Keep in mind that an apprenticeship can come in many different forms. It can happen at one place or several years, or it can consist of several different positions in the different places. A kind of compound apprenticeship involved many different skills. It can include a mix of graduate school and practical experience. In all of these cases, it will help you think in terms of these steps, although you may need to give added weight to a particular one depending on the nature of your field. So again, right, these are going to be the three modes, right? Steps or modes: the deep observation, right? The passive mode, skill acquisition, the practice mode, and the experimentation, the active mode. So here we go, right? Here's we're going to start out with the passive mode. Um, Step one, deep observation, the passive mode. When you enter a career or new environment, you move into a world with its own rules, procedures, and social dynamics. For decades or even centuries, people have compiled knowledge of how to get things done in a particular field, each generation improving on the past. In addition, every workplace has its own conventions, rules of behavior, and work standards. There are also all kinds of power relationships that exist between individuals. All of this represents a reality that transcends your individual needs and desires. And so, you task upon entering the world is to observe and absorb its reality as deeply as possible. The greatest mistake you can make in the initial months of your apprenticeship is to imagine that you have to get attention, impress people, and improve yourself. These thoughts will dominate your mind and close it off from the reality around you. Any positive attention you receive is deceptive. Uh, It is not based on your skills or anything real, and it will turn against you. Instead, you will want to now acknowledge the reality and submit to it, muting your color and keep in the background as much as possible. Remain passive and giving yourself the space to observe. You will also want to drop any preconceptions preconceptions you might have about the world you are entering. If you impress people in these first months, it should be because of the seriousness of your desire to learn, not because you are trying to rise to the top before you are ready. And something that I can probably talk about, my personal experience, coming straight out of college, working in Reese Foods. I did not come up from from the ranks. I did not come back, I did not come from the ranks. I didn't, you know, didn't start as, a worker there. I just, finished my college and went straight into Reese Foods. And when I went to Reese Foods, I just realized that, I didn't have the experience to run, a pre-badge. Didn't have the experience to run anybody, just didn't have the experience. So again, I struggled with that, but even then, it was very hard for me to ask for help. And one of the things I probably didn't ask for help because I just didn't know what to ask. I didn't just again, if I would have probably sat back and observed, maybe my history would be different, but I didn't. I wanted again, as quick as I got myself up, that's how quick I wanted, the results to be. Because really, all I wanted to be was successful, and I wasn't chasing knowledge. I wasn't chasing, expanding my mind. What I was chasing was the position. And when I did that, I remember not taking the time to listen, not asking those questions of why are you doing this, why are you mixing the food this way, why are you, preparing the, just the different departments that I was a supervisor for. Just didn't ask those questions, maybe the right questions because I was so more focused on just the position that I was holding. So again, it's kind of a true statement as far as when you get to your job initially, it's about just being quiet and observing and listening because that's what it is, right? You're in the passive mode. You will be observing two essential realities in the new world. First, you will observe the rules and procedures that govern success in this environment. In other words, this is how we do things here. Some of those rules will be communicated to you directly, generally the ones that are superficial and largely a matter of common sense. You may pay attention to these and observe them, but what is more interest are the rules that are unstated and are part of the underlying work culture. These concern styles and values are considered important. They are often a reflection of the character of the man or woman on top. And the second reality is you will observe the power of relationship that exists within the group. Who has the real control? Through whom do all communications flow? Who is the rise and who is the decline? Who is in the rise and who is in decline? For more those, they're going to be in phase four. These procedural and political rules may be dysfunctional or counterproductive, but your job is not to moralize about this or complain, but merely to understand them, to get a complete lay of the land. You are like an anthropologist studying an alien culture, attuned to all of its nuances and conventions. Fast forward, every task you are given, no matter how menial, offers opportunities to observe the world at work. Slowly, you'll begin to see behind the appearances as you amass more information about the rules and power of dynamic of your new environment. You can begin to analyze the why. All right, fast forward. Understand there are several critical reasons why you must follow this step. First, knowing your environment inside and out will help you in navigating it and avoiding costly mistakes. You are like a hunter. Your knowledge of every detail of the forest and of the ecosystem as a whole will give you many more options for several and survival and success. Second, the ability to observe any unfamiliar environment will become a critical lifelong skill. You will develop the habit of stilling your ego and looking outward instead of inward. You will see in any encounter what most people miss because they are thinking of themselves. You will cultivate a keen eye for human psychology and strengthen your ability to focus. Finally, you will become accustomed to observing first, based on your ideas and their theories on what you have seen with your eyes. and then analyze what you find. This will be a very important skill for the next creative phase in your life. All right. So again, that is that first skill, right? Which is step one, deep observation, right? You're there to observe, there to be quiet, there to learn. Um, and it's sometimes it's hard. It's hard, again, to learn if you're talking, right? If you're talking, or you're, you're wanting to be the best, and you haven't earned your position. One of the also books that I kind of recommend is 40 Laws of Power, and law number one is don't outshine the master, right? So, and it goes into either your boss, it could either be somebody that's in that job currently that holds a higher position than you, right? And he's the go-to, and that's okay. Kind of reminds me of Steve Young. I'm a 49er fan, but Steve Young under Joe Montana, right? You find yourself where you have probably two of the best quarterbacks, and one is a backup and one's the primary, and Steve Young had to hold his position. And there was a moment in time where, yeah, Joe Montana got injured and Steve Young went in, and he did a great game. And eventually, the 49ers did go with Steve Young, and Joe Montana had to go to Kansas City. But you got to wait your turn, and your turn will come. But you have to learn, open up your mind. There's many moments in time where, I can say is I was apprenticed to many, in many parts of my life, different parts of avenues, different parts of, how I was going through life. Like, when I was a carpenter, when I was helping this old gentleman, just do work around the home, his homes, during the summer. And I was 11 years old, and it was manual work, but you get used to working with a saw, how to measure things, some of the things that, how you cut things, knowing that, no job was impossible. Going to landscaping and seeing, the little techniques, they call it in Spanish, and in Espanol le hacemos mañas, you find those different ways to how to cut grass, how to, set up your gear. That way, as soon as you get to the site, you're ready to go, uh, there's painting, just painting around the house, roofing, all these different labor jobs I done, attention to detail, the catering, where, it's about making sure the food is prepared and edible. Knowing from an entrepreneur, as I was going to college and seeing, the entrepreneur that I was working with, just the ability that he gave me to negotiate, and kind of tell me about, just give me the best prices, and then, and give me that freedom, the freedom to be able to negotiate, price per Red Bull, price per, Pepsi, whatever that was selling, got it to the point to where, every fork, every spoon, that cost, every time, you're providing some type of food to the customer, what all that cost, just to give him everything he needed to eat. And I was fighting for prices, but I'm thankful for those experiences, right? And that they let me the opportunity to just kind of learn from them, learn about the business, learn about, a catering company. Then, going to Reese Foods, and even though, I wasn't prepared for that job, then join the military, and then throughout the ranks, just having somebody there to train me, to teach me, to mentor me. And the Army is good at that. The Army, the military, thank God that gave me the opportunity to join the military, because again, I was able to kind of go in there and see exactly, what that was, what was there for me. One of my first, I can say, probably apprentices that I ever had was, even though he kind of probably didn't look like it, but he outranked me by a little bit. But it was like, Luis Garcia. He was a guy that I failed my first PT test. And he was there, and he was a smaller guy, but he liked to run. Excuse me. And just those type of things. I find myself in any position, that I'm gonna go to, that I'm gonna learn something from. I stay quiet and observe. And it's after this. I mean, and this book didn't exist at the time, but now that I kind of look back on things, I kind of see where I just had to be quiet, and listen and observe and see, what things are happening around me. When I was SPO trans in 3-3 up in Kelly Hill and Fort Benning, there was a truck master there when I was in SPO trans. older gentleman, about 24 years in, so I'm first class. But I was a staff sergeant there. But he had that knowledge of the equipment. And that's 24 years of experience. At the time, I think I might have had um, probably 6 years in. Yeah, 6 years in, going on seven when when I was a staff sergeant, and just seeing and getting the knowledge from that truck master of just the equipment. Hey, you need a PLS to move that fresh. There was all these different requirements that were happening, and he was the one that kind of outlined those requirements for me to the point to where I kind of understood, like any machine that I would see in front of me. I knew what the capabilities, what I needed to move it, and that was ingrained in me. And then when finally I had an NCO that kind of came later on, I taught him the same way, where like he can observe something and easily kind of understand what that piece of equipment was, and what it entails. So again, um, even in current positions, that I find myself, even back for, 3, 4, understanding that, I'm there to learn. And I was grateful for the opportunity is given to me. So there's times where I just had to be quiet, just be quiet and learn, and ask the questions, because they offered me opportunity to learn from, a chief, to become eventually a mobility officer. And even as I got to the new, locations, as a MOB, I found myself the same thing, right? I go to the new location and I'm quiet. But the difference was there was already experience, right? Where when things didn't seem um, that make sense, I was able to bring them up, and it wasn't because of the black and white or something that I read. It was because I have lived experience. So again, given the opportunities, to learn from somebody, and they're taking the time to teach you, take advantage of those things, because again, you just never know when you're going to get those opportunities again. So what I kind of ask is, as you're getting to these positions, new jobs, new adventures, new just new anything, right? And you're there, you're in observation mode, right? You're in learning mode, and it's okay. It's a journey again. So step 2, skills acquisition, the practice mode. At some point, as you progress through these initial months of observation, you will enter the most critical part of the apprenticeship, the practice towards the acquisition of skills. Fast forward. This learning process leads to what we shall call tacit knowledge, a feeling for what you are doing that is hard to put into words but easily to demonstrate in action. And and to understand how this learning process operates, it is useful to look at the greatest systems ever invented for the training of skills and achievements of tacit knowledge. This system arose as a solution to a problem. A business expanded in the Middle Ages. Masters of various crafts could no longer depend on family members to work in the shop. They needed more hands, but it was not worth it for them to bring in people who would come and go. They needed stability and time to build up skills in their workers. And so they developed the apprenticeship system, in which young people from approximately the ages of 12 to 17 would enter work in a shop, signing a contract that would commit them for the term of 7 years. At the end of the term, apprentice would have to pass a master test or produce a master work to prove their level of skill. Once passed, they were now elevated to the rank of journeymen and could travel wherever there was work, practicing the craft. Because a few books or drawings existed at the time, apprentices will learn the trade from watching masters and imitating them as closely as possible. They learn through endless repetitions and hands-on work. There very little verbal instructions. The word apprentice itself comes from the Latin prehedere, meaning to grasp with hands. Fast forward. What this means is simple. Language, or oral and written, is relatively recent invention. Well, before that time, our ancestors had to learn various skills, tool making, hunting, and so forth. The natural model for learning largely based on power of mirror neurons come from watching and imitating others, then repeating the actions over and over. Our brains are highly suited for the form of learning. So again, right? Um, I'm going to add to this. So again, right? So one thing I knew, you know, and I talked about in a previous podcast, but again, right? I kind of knew what I wanted to be, but I knew, I was the deployable soldier. Like I deployed, like I knew what it was to be in Iraq, Afghanistan, Korea, twice, and then finally, giving me opportunity to go to Europe and be under a mobility officer and learn from the mobility officer, Chief Alexandre, and then he again taught me what it was to be TCAMs, how to redeploy a unit, how to maneuver a unit through Europe. Being not afraid to call, to make actions. Once I learned a specific step, put it into practice, and then seeing the results of that. Building trains, just the different opportunities I had in that deployment. And I remember, thinking to myself like, it was a great experience, but it wasn't enough. Then, fast forward, we redeploy the unit. I go to NTC, same thing. You kind of have grasp this experience of NTC, get them there, leave, and then you get ready to go to Kuwait. And I remember like even at that moment in time, I was really good at rail. Again, I'm 3-3. Chief of Lab was a mobility down there, and kind of just seeing the experience of the railhead operations. I was great at line haul operations. I was able to kind of again support the 3-4 and in Beaumont for their deployment. Their rotation to Europe. So the port, the rail, the line haul, I was solid at. And then eventually, you fast forward and, now you're doing strategic air in Carson, and then be able to understand what that is, doing load plans. But I guess, the way you kind of look at things, even in your craft and as you're learning, the master's always going to give you something more for you to learn from, right? So then if you mastered something, guess what? Now you're learning something else. In that case, it was for me, it was strategic air. I was good at the other stuff, minus strat air. Again, I knew the vessel requirements, I knew the documentation, and today, to this day, I still have it in my head, like if it was yesterday. But then again, being there at the airfield, and then coming up, seeing problems, coming up with solutions, but the trust was there. Trust was built with Chief Alexandre as I was his apprentice, and he was teaching me these, just how to work, right, to be on ground, to observe how he was and how he did things, and always open book, always there to tell me, what any questions you have, I'll train you. And even then, again, in a moment in time, I always told people like I didn't want to be a warrant officer. So again, right? I guess he didn't take that like that was it, right? Even though I said that, like I guess again, a master will always kind of look at his apprentice and know what he's capable of, and he's knowing what he's teaching him. It's just again the apprentice kind of doesn't understand, doesn't know it, And if you kind of really look at it, I did do my years under him, to learn, as an apprentice. And then finally, you find yourself, going to Kuwait and then doing a lot of the strategic air. So now totally different operation, right? But then again, it's TCAImed, it's I code, it's building load plans, and then getting to know, other mobilities while I was in Kuwait, some National Guard, some active duty, complet 2 or 3. But again, that whole experience and then being able to do an exercise inside of Kuwait. But then again, it's like understanding how do you build, a plan, a exercise plan, while you're deployed, um, knowing the requirements and then building off that, right? The requirements were, how many days out, what documentation was required. Again, I already knew that from deploying. I already knew that from, Europe. I already knew that from just previous experiences. So using that and building off that. And again, just being able to do that on my own. And Chief Alexander just trusted me and just moving 300 pieces. It was like 300 above, like 100, 350 pieces and packs to, to this different location while we were forward. And then using that same experience, same knowledge that was received from that exercise to then deploy the entire brigade or redeploy him back, right, through the surface. And again, him going to do strategic air while I went and kind of did the surface portion of it at the port, and during those moments in time, being exposed to other mobs and mobs asking me, hey, man, why don't you put your packet in? But again, I was more focused on just being a first sergeant at the time. I wasn't um, thinking about being a warrant until toward the very end, right? Until I found the niche. And again, it takes that time, and there's some practice to it. There are certain years, right? And even after I got back, working, starting to learn the orders process, helping, how to write orders with, the AS4, and just learning all that process. And again, I already knew what the staff did for me, as a brigade, section. Because again, at the time I wasn't a brigade mode, but just learning, just, observing, understanding that, when the master is there to train you, you sit back, and then when it's your time to action, you put it in practice, and to say like I was there since 16, and they didn't leave until 16, 17, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So I was rarely there around like 4 years, almost five, under Chief Alexandre as the mobility officer. And finally, when I was in the SFAB and dropped my packet, like I knew there was way more than enough knowledge to go to a brigade and execute. Um, and to be honest, when you find yourself in that mode, again, when you have a master, an instructor, professor, whatever that is you want to call, that's teaching you, that's taking the time to train you. Never, that was kind of one of my mistakes, right? And I talked about the 40 laws of power, talked about the first one, never outshine a master, and there's times where, as an apprentice, I want to run already. I want to go do these things. And, the master has that experience, and I got to understand, I got to kind of fall back a little bit, and still in my learning phase, I have not mastered everything. I haven't mastered it all. And it's always a journey. So again, if you find yourself, wanting to be a warrant or under a warrant officer, and you want to, become a MOB, or you're in a position in your current work, and you're the second in command, or you're the lead instead of the manager, you're a worker, but they're giving you the opportunities. Again, when I was in, let me step back, when I was in college, I wasn't the manager at the catering company. I was a stock boy, and I was getting paid the exact same thing. But being able, the freedoms to be able to just kind of say, what, let me see if I can get this guy better prices. And I even asked him, if I can get you better prices, will you be okay with that? And it was just applying the stuff I was learning in school, and then seeing if it worked, and it was working, right. I was had competitors, just fight for a bit for his business, and it was a great experience. So even that opportunity was great for me. So when it came to being a mobility, NCO, and doing all these different things, talking to different people, like I wasn't afraid. I was about always moving forward, always getting things done, always doing the best I could for my team. And one of the things I think I always remember is that when you're part of a team, that's your team, and you'll do whatever it takes and whatever you need to do for your team. So you find yourself, in those different modes, just that's it is what it is. So again, if you find yourself as an apprentice, take advantage of that. Continue on here. First, it is essential that you begin with one skill that you can master, and that serves as a foundation for acquisition or others. You must avoid all costs the idea that you can manage learning skills at several skills at a time. You need to develop your power of concentration and understand that trying to multitask will be the death of the process. Second, the initial stages of learning a skill invariably involves tedium. Yet rather than avoiding this inevitable tedium, you must accept and embrace it. The pain and boredom we experience in the initial stage of learning a skill toughens our minds, much like physical exercise. Too many people believe that everything must be pleasurable in life, which makes them constantly searching for distractions and short circuits the learning process. The pain is a kind of challenge your mind presents. You will learn how to focus and move past the boredom. Or like a child, will you succumb to the need for immediate pleasure and distraction. Much as with physical exercise, you can even get a kind of perverse pleasure out of this pain, knowing the benefits it will bring to you. In any event, you must meet any boredom head on and not try to avoid or repress it. Throughout your life, you will encounter tedious situations and you must cultivate the ability to handle them with discipline. So, again, right, it talks about, just it's going to be boring, it's going to be tedious, it's going to be repetitive. When I was on my since deployment going to Kuwait, man, this is my, I was like, come on, man, like this is the second. Then going to being a MOB, and then taking the unit to Korea, but it was so repetitive, so consistent. No matter what location I was taking, the brigade, I was ready, and it was so repetitive that I can see things before they happen, and that's when I knew, like, at this point in time, I became you know um what I was meant to be, which was, to be that master, to be that what was needed of me to be, and I'm thankful for that. And here you go, right? Kind of goes also, you kind of continue. You reveal to yourself new capabilities that were previously latent, that are exposed as you progress. And again, right, it talks about the 10,000 hours, right? And usually that's kind of where they probably say that to be, you got to do your 10,000 hours of practice. And it's true, right? Again, when it was my time to shine, um, trust me, like I probably knew 90% of everything that was going to happen, and I foreseen it and I foreshadowed it, because again, I knew what that experience was, and and people probably looked at me like it looked effortless, and people have said that before, but again, I think it's all thanks to the opportunities I had prior to be apprentice under somebody, and then being able to learn and be humble enough to know that, yes, there's times I didn't, I wanted to progress right now, right? You can say, but by taking my time, I am where I am today. Step three, experimentation, the active mode. This is the shortest part of the process, but a critical component nonetheless. As you gain in skill and confidence, you must make the move to more active mode of experimentation. This could mean taking a more responsibility, initiating a project of some sort, doing work that exposes you to the criticism of peers and even the public. The point of this is to gauge your progress and whether there are still gaps in your knowledge. You are observing yourself in action and seeing how you respond to the judgment of others. Can you take criticism and use it constructively? Fast forward, most people wait too long to take this step, generally out of fear. It is always easier to learn the rules and stay within your comfort zone. Often you must force yourself to initiate such actions or experiments before you think you are ready. You are testing your character, moving past your fears, and developing a sense of detachment to your work. Looking at it through the eyes of others, you are getting a taste for the next phase in which, excuse me, which what you produce will be under constant scrutiny. You will know when your apprenticeship is over by the feeling of that you have nothing left to learn from this environment. Fast forward, many people find notions of apprenticeship and skills acquisition as a quaint relic of bygone eras when work meant making things. After all, we have entered the information of and computer age in which technology makes it so we can do without the kind of menial tasks that require practice and repetition. So many things have become virtual in our lives, making the craftsman model obsolete, or some to argue argument goes, or so the argument goes. In truth, right? However, the idea of nature of the times we are living in is completely incorrect, even dangerous. The era we have entered is not one in which technology will make everything easier, but rather a time of increased complexity that affects every field in business. Competition has become globalized and more intense. A business person must have a command of much larger picture than the past, which means more knowledge and skills. The future in science does not lie in increasing specialization, but rather in the combined and cross fertilization of knowledge in various fields. In arts, tastes and styles are changing at the accelerated rate. An artist must be on top of this and be incapable of creating new forms, always remaining ahead of the curve. This often requires having more than just a specialized knowledge of that particular art form. It requires knowing other parts, even the sciences, and what is happening in the world. That's the truth, right? Fast forward. In the future, the great division will be between those who have trained themselves to handle these complexities and those who are overwhelmed by them. Those who can acquire skills and disciplines their mind, and those who are irrevocably distracted by all the media around them and can never focus enough to learn. The apprenticeship phase is more relevant and important than ever, and those who discount this notion will almost certainly be left behind. Finally, we live in a culture that generally values intellect and reasoning with words. We tend to think of working with the hands, of building something physical as degrading skills for those who are less intelligent. This is an extremely counterproductive cultural value. The human brain evolved in intimate conjunction with the hand. Many of our earliest survival skills depend on the elaborate hand-eye coordination. This to this day, a large portion of our brain is developed to this relationship. When we work with our hands and build something, we learn how to sequence our actions and how to organize our thoughts. In taking anything apart in order to fix it, we learn problem solving skills that have wider application, even if it is only as a side activity. You should find a way to work with your hands or learn more about the inner workings of the mechanics of pieces of technology around you. Many masters in history intuited this connection. In general, no matter your field, you may think of yourself as a builder using critical materials and ideas. You are producing something tangible in your work, something that affects people in some direct, concrete way. To build something well, a house, a political organization, a business, or a film, you must understand the building process and possesses the necessity skills. You are a craftsman learning to adhere to the highest standard. For all of this, you must go through the careful apprenticeship. You cannot make anything worthwhile in the world unless you have the first developed to transform yourself. So again, right? You know, at the end of the day, there's still a little bit more to the chapter. It kind of goes into the strategies for the ideal apprenticeship, and it will probably be the next episode. But again, what I was trying to get at with this one is, finally, when I was, the active mode, getting after it mode, not only as a mobility NCO, but also as a chief, being able to do that and taking a unit to Korea and then bringing them back. And again, creating systems that were previous experience. I was talking about last time, the placards, the issues that I foresaw at the port, and, the issues that, this time they didn't have no strategic air, even as we were doing all the redeployment movements, knowing where my position was and what everybody else, because again, I worked in the SPO, I knew what the SPO did. I worked in, I was a first sergeant, what the sergeant major, op sergeant major do for you. I knew the operation side of the house. I knew what the data that I needed from my S1 because, again, like all these different things I already had lived, already had experienced as a apprentice. So when I became the active mode, it just became so natural. It became so easy that, there was kind of that look at me or stare of Chief Martinez, right? Of like, man, like, why does he know, or how does he know these things are happening or about to happen, or why did we not have those issues that the previous unit had? And reality is because I took the time. I took the time before I came over. And one of the reasons why, I took the time as well was, I didn't want to let myself down. I didn't want to let the people that believed in me down. Man, I didn't want to let down even the master. I didn't want to let down, the person that taught me, even the people that believed in me. I just didn't want to let nobody down. And something that I kind of enjoyed about Matt Frazier, CrossFit. He would be the type of person that when he would compete, and then get to the point to where no one was competing against him. Um, and that was the goal of mine, to make almost in a way like one of the most perfect moves that I can do based off the experience that I had built, to deploy a brigade across the pond. And I don't know if it was perfect or not, but in my eyes, it was probably the most seamless, movement that was done to Korea and back. And that's just thanks to, just that experience that I had before. And then, just be able to feed that information to others and kind of be the first. When you're the first, and you're kind of the one that creates the SOP. And, I'm thankful for the experience when I was in 70th Movement Control Team up in Afghanistan, where, I was the first to, we're the first MCT to kind of hit ground, and then being able to uh, do the ECP operations, and be the first ones to kind of develop an SOP for that, and then write an SOP. Thanks for finance for, when I was in finance, Sergeant First Class Soto as a PFC was having me write an SOP for the processing section. So I'm just thankful for all this leadership, right? This leadership, and throughout the phases of life, taking the time to train me, and there's no better way. I'm thankful for, again, the Army. I'm thankful for, just my leaders that kind of gave me the opportunity to learn from them. And even then, to this day, I'm learning from somebody else. I'm learning from the people that I work with currently. And there's times where I just have to, understand that I'm new to the location. I'm new to this job, and I'm in my learning phase, right? I'm in that observation phase. And then, I get to action some things and get to create certain things. But again, um, I'm still observing. I'm still learning. I'm still learning new things every day, because that's a challenge, right? The challenge for me has always been knowledge. Has always been the wanting to learn more about my craft, and the ability to share that with everybody else. So again, if you find yourself listening to this podcast, and you want to be in the military, you want to be in the Army, be an NCO, or you want to be a warrant officer, or even an officer, whatever that is that you want to do, in your life. If it's not the military, it's a profession that you carry. Again, I always recommend this book of mastery, and I'm thankful. I'm thankful and I'm grateful. The attitude of gratitude. One of my first, I can say probably, well, I know one of the first masters I ever had was my father. Right, he was the master in spirituality, and he spent a lot of time, praying, meditating, and I'm thankful for his example of reading in front of me. Right, again, we're like, what was that saying? It's like monkey see, monkey do. And to be honest with you, that's probably the perfect way, that I learned. Right, um, it was what was it? Just the visual learner, and I don't give up. I don't give up. And so again, thank you so much again for tuning in. This is again Johnny Cinco, one of the podcasts that are uploaded. This is episode 4. Again, this is kind of the first part of the apprenticeship, that I was kind of going through, and the 3 stages. So again, keep on tuning in. Thank you so much for tuning in. Keep on tuning into the Johnny Cinco podcast, the 5 minutes, 5 seconds podcast as well. And I enjoy doing this, and I'm hoping that it helps not only the future warrants, or future military, future Army, or even if you have, if you're an Army brat, just understand, what, the things that a military soldier kind of goes through, And then also again, if you're in there in your grind, if you're in a job as a civilian and you find yourself, learning from somebody, eventually you'll get there. Everything's a journey. Everything's a process. It's like losing weight. It's like gaining muscle. It's just getting new knowledge of something. It's a progress. It's a process, and enjoy it. During those, again, those repetitive moments where it's like, man, this is repetitive. This is repetitive, and this is the same thing over and over. This is my third time being across the pond. This is my third, and it's repetitive. It's repetitive. We do repetitive things in the military consistently because we want to get better at shooting. We want to get better at combatives. You want to get, whatever the case may be, it's always repetitive. Deployment's always repetitive. I'm at the port again. I'm at the railhead again. I'm at line haul ops again. I'm under TCAIMs. I'm in, the other systems that we use. Um, where we're going through this consistently back to back to back to back and seeing the same errors over and over, right? And the goal is, how can I help these young mobs coming up to avoid these things, right? Because for some reason, these things are not, as we kind of progress in our career, um, no one, or there is people out there, sorry, there is people out there that are feeding it, but and a lot of our knowledge is retiring now. So the goal is, if you're listening to this podcast and you're a mobility officer or you're just a warrant in general and you're trying to get, and you're a technical at your skills, and you understand what it is that, we're, it's about growing this, right? Growing this. So again, tune into that, tune into the to the podcast again, and tune into the I got a workout vlog as well, where I just share, this is what I do, man. This is what I work out, because again, it's not only about feeding my mind, but it's also feeding my body, filling the muscles. Again, and a lot of the things that I like to do is just that functional movement, that movement that is picking up something heavy and moving it from here to there, right? Like that whole like primitive type of workouts that I kind of enjoy, the conditioning, the different types of conditioning, because again, I want to test myself still, and I want to be able to pick up heavy things, obscure heavy things, and move from point A to point B, ruck march, put a backpack on my back, or whatever the case may be. So again, thank you so much for tuning in. This is Johnny Cinco. Peace.